The mandatory retirement policy for K-9 officers in Cascade County, Montana seemed straightforward on paper. Any police dog reaching 9 years of age must be immediately retired from active duty and placed in an approved care facility or adopted by qualified personnel. What the policy didn't account for was corruption, budget cuts, and administrators who viewed retired service dogs as liabilities rather than heroes. Officer Granite Lockwood had spent 7 years partnered with Justice, a Belgian Malinois whose detection record was unmatched in the county's history. Together they'd made over 300 arrests, seized millions in illegal narcotics, and become the faces of the department's community outreach program. But when Justice turned 9 and was forced into retirement, Granite's application to adopt his partner was mysteriously denied by Lieutenant Vex Carrington, the department's new K-9 program director. Carrington had been brought in from out of state with promises to modernize and streamline the K-9 unit. What nobody knew initially was that his real agenda involved redirecting retirement funds meant for proper care facilities into a network of substandard kennels run by his brother-in-law, Thorne Merrick. The arrangement was simple and profitable: charge the department premium rates for luxury retirement placement, while keeping dogs in conditions barely above neglect. The difference went straight into Carrington and Merrick's pockets. When Granite tried to visit Justice at the approved facility, he was turned away with excuses about adjustment periods and policy restrictions. When he pushed harder, demanding to see his former partner, Carrington made it clear, back off or lose your job. Granite was a single father with a daughter in college. He couldn't afford to be unemployed. So he backed off, believing Justice was at least being cared for, even if they couldn't see each other. The truth was far worse. Justice had been placed in a kennel with 6 other retired police dogs, all crammed into spaces designed for half that number. Food was inconsistent. Medical care was minimal. The facility was technically legal, just barely, but morally bankrupt. Justice, who'd spent his entire career protecting and serving, was now just another number in a profit scheme. After 4 months of this treatment, Justice escaped. He squeezed through a gap in the fence that should have been repaired weeks earlier and disappeared into the Montana wilderness. Merrick didn't report the escape immediately. Doing so would trigger an inspection that might expose his operation. Instead, he waited 3 days before filing a report, claiming Justice had recently gone missing. By then, the dog had traveled nearly 40 miles, following some instinct or memory back toward the county where he'd worked, back toward the partner he'd lost. He was found collapsed on the side of Highway 91 by a passing motorist who called animal control. The dog was emaciated, dehydrated, his paws bloody from walking on asphalt, and showing signs of severe psychological trauma. Granite didn't learn about any of this through official channels. He found out when a sympathetic animal control officer named Waverly Storm recognized Justice from department photos and made an unauthorized call. "If you want to see your dog alive," she said, "you need to come now. And when you do, you need to be ready to fight." Because the moment Granite showed up to claim Justice, Lieutenant Carrington's entire operation would be exposed. And people who profit from cruelty don't give up their schemes without a fight. The Belgian Malinois was barely recognizable. Granite Lockwood stood in the emergency veterinary clinic, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white, staring at the dog on the examination table. Justice's ribs showed through dull fur that had once gleamed like copper in sunlight. His eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had never missed a threat, were glazed with exhaustion and something worse: defeat. "How long has he been like this?" Granite's voice came out rougher than intended, anger competing with grief. The veterinarian, Dr. Soren Blackwell, didn't sugarcoat it. Based on his condition? Weeks. Maybe longer. This isn't sudden neglect. This is systematic. Waverly Storm, the animal control officer who'd made the call, stood near the door with her arms crossed. She was in her late 30s, small but solid, with the kind of expression that said she'd seen too much cruelty and stopped being surprised by it. Highway Patrol found him collapsed on Route 91. He'd walked at least 40 miles. His paws are shredded. He's severely dehydrated. And Granite. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He won't let anyone touch him except me. And even then, barely. Granite moved closer to the table. Justice's ears twitched at the sound of footsteps, but he didn't lift his head. Didn't react. Granite's throat tightened. Justice. Hey, partner. It's me. Nothing. The dog's breathing remained shallow, his body motionless except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. Granite reached out slowly, his hand hovering inches above Justice's head. The moment his fingers made contact with familiar fur, everything changed. Justice's eyes flew open. His head lifted with effort that clearly cost him. And then the dog made a sound, not a bark, not a whine, but something between a sob and a gasp. Recognition flooded those amber eyes. Granite dropped to his knees beside the table, both hands now cradling Justice's face. I'm here, boy. I've got you. Justice pressed his muzzle against Granite's chest, trembling violently. 7 years of partnership, of trust built through danger and discipline, came rushing back in a wave that made Granite's vision blur. This was his partner. His brother in everything but species. And someone had done this to him. Who? Granite's question was quiet but lethal. Who approved the placement facility? Waverly pulled out a folder from her bag. Lieutenant Vex Carrington. He's been routing all K9 retirements through a facility called Mountain View Kennels. Owner is Thorne Merrick. She handed Granite a printout. Carrington's wife's maiden name is Merrick. They're brothers-in-law. The facility is licensed, technically legal, but what? Granite looked up, Justice still pressed against him. But 6 other retired K9s have come through animal control in the last year with similar conditions, Waverly said. Malnutrition. Psychological trauma. One didn't make it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Granite's jaw clenched so hard it ached. You're telling me Carrington has been profiting off neglecting retired police dogs? I'm telling you I can't prove it, Waverly corrected. I'm telling you the pattern is there. I'm telling you that if you try to fight this officially, you'll hit walls. Carrington has connections. And you're just one officer. Dr. Blackwell interrupted. I hate to break this up, but Justice needs 4 fluids immediately. His kidney function is compromised. If we don't act now, he might not recover. Granite nodded, stepping back to give the vet room to work. But his eyes never left Justice, and as needles were inserted and fluids began flowing, Granite made a decision. He wasn't just one officer. He was Justice's partner. And partners don't abandon each other. 2 hours later, Justice was stabilized and sleeping under sedation. Granite sat in the waiting room with Waverly, both nursing terrible coffee from a vending machine. What's your plan? Waverly asked. Because if you're thinking about going after Carrington, you should know he's already 3 steps ahead. The moment you showed up here, the clock started ticking. As if summoning him by name, Granite's phone buzzed. Lieutenant Vex Carrington. He stared at the screen, then answered without speaking. Carrington's voice was smooth, professional, completely lacking warmth. Officer Lockwood. I understand you're at a veterinary clinic with a dog matching the description of retired K9 Justice. That's right. Granite's voice was flat. I'm with my partner. Your former partner, Carrington corrected, who was properly placed in an approved facility as per department protocol. His escape and subsequent condition are unfortunate, but they don't change the fact that he's department property, currently listed as missing. I need you to return him to Mountain View Kennels immediately. Granite's free hand clenched into a fist. He's not going back there. Then you're in violation of department policy regarding retired K9 handling, Carrington said, still perfectly calm. Which is a terminable offense. Are you really willing to lose your job over a dog that isn't yours anymore? The question was designed to wound, and it worked. Granite thought of his daughter Ember, her college tuition, the bills that didn't stop coming. But then he thought of Justice collapsed on a highway, having walked 40 miles toward home. Try me, Granite said, and ended the call. Waverly was staring at him with something between respect and concern. You just declared war on a lieutenant. He declared war when he tortured my partner, Granite replied. His phone buzzed again, a text this time, from a number he didn't recognize. Check your email. You need to see this. A friend. Granite opened his email on his phone. The message contained 3 video files and a document. The first video showed the interior of Mountain View kennels. Cramped cages, filthy conditions, dogs that looked more like prisoners than retirees. The second video was financial records showing payments from the department to Mountain View that were 3 times higher than industry standard. The third video was a recording of Carrington and Merrick discussing keeping costs low and profits high. Who sent this? Waverly leaned closer to look at the screen. No idea. But this is enough to destroy Carrington. Granite forwarded everything to his personal email, then to 3 news outlets and the state attorney general's office. If he wants a fight, he's getting one. His phone rang again. This time it was his captain, Vernon Steele. Lockwood, my office. Now. Granite looked at Justice through the window of the recovery room. The dog was still sleeping, finally peaceful. I can't leave him. Then you're suspended, Steele said. Effective immediately. Badge and weapon, Officer Lockwood. I won't ask again. The line went dead. Waverly touched his arm. Granite, if you're suspended, you have no authority. Carrington can claim Justice is stolen department property and have you arrested. Then he'll have to arrest me, Granite said quietly. Because I'm not leaving my partner again. Dr. Blackwell emerged from the recovery room. He's waking up. And he's asking for you. Dogs don't ask for things with words, but anyone who'd worked with K9s knew the signs. The searching gaze, the whine that meant specific recognition, the way Justice's head lifted when Granite entered the room despite obvious exhaustion. Granite sat beside the recovery crate, his hands slipping through the bars to rest on Justice's neck. We're in trouble, partner. But we've been in worse. Justice's eyes focused on him with that old intensity, that focus that had made him one of the best detection dogs in the state. And Granite saw something he hadn't seen before, determination. Justice wasn't giving up. Which meant neither could he. The clinic's front door chimed. Voices in the lobby, official voices, using that particular tone cops develop when they're not asking, they're telling. Waverly appeared in the doorway, her expression urgent. Sheriff's deputies. They have a warrant to seize Justice as department property. Granite stood slowly. How long do I have? They're talking to Dr. Blackwell now. Maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes to decide between his career and his partner. 2 minutes to choose between the safe path and the right one. Granite looked at Justice, who was struggling to stand despite his condition, responding to the tension in the air the way he'd been trained. Ready to work even when his body was broken. That decided it. Is there a back exit? Granite asked. Waverly's eyes widened. You're not seriously. Is there a back exit? He repeated. Dr. Blackwell appeared behind Waverly. Loading dock. Through that hallway. But if you're caught stealing department property, he's not property, Granite interrupted. He's my partner. And I don't leave my partner behind. He opened the recovery crate, carefully lifting Justice. The dog was lighter than he should be, his body still weak, but his eyes were alert now, focused. Trusting. They made it to the loading dock before someone shouted behind them. Granite's truck was parked 50 feet away across the backlot. He ran, Justice cradled against his chest, the dog's heartbeat rapid against his arms. Behind them, a deputy appeared in the doorway. Stop. Officer Lockwood, that's an order. Granite reached his truck, yanking the door open and setting Justice carefully in the passenger seat. The dog slumped immediately, exhausted from the brief movement. Granite jumped behind the wheel and fired the engine. The deputy was running now, hand on his weapon. Granite peeled out of the lot, tires squealing, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. In the passenger seat, Justice looked at him with those amber eyes, and for a moment Granite saw a flash of the dog Justice had been, confident, capable, unstoppable. They drove for 20 minutes before Granite felt safe enough to pull over at a rest stop. His hands were shaking. What the hell did I just do? Justice shifted closer, pressing his head against Granite's arm. The answer was simple. He'd chosen loyalty over law, partnership over policy. And now they were both fugitives. Granite's phone buzzed constantly, calls from the captain, from internal affairs, from numbers he didn't recognize. He turned it off. They needed to disappear, at least temporarily. Give Justice time to recover. Give Granite time to figure out how to fight a system that valued policy over animals who'd given everything. He drove north, toward the mountains, toward a cabin his late father had owned in wilderness so remote that cell service was a memory and the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. If they were going to make a stand, they needed ground they could defend. Justice slept as they drove, his breathing evening out, his body finally relaxing. Granite kept one hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath fur. Alive. Together. That was enough for now. 3 days later, the cabin had become a fortress of sorts. Granite had stocked supplies, set up security cameras on the access road, and created a recovery space for Justice with the help of medical supplies he'd bought with cash from 3 different stores. Justice was improving. Slowly, painfully, but improving. His appetite had returned. His eyes had regained some of their sharpness. And he was starting to move like the working dog he'd always been, even if his body wasn't quite ready yet. The email from the friend had gone viral. News outlets across the state were covering the story of retired K9 neglect. Social media had exploded with outrage. And according to a burner phone Waverly had given him before he left, the state attorney general had opened an investigation into Mountain View Kennels and Lieutenant Carrington's involvement. But Granite was still a wanted man. Technically, he'd stolen department property and fled with it. The fact that the property had a name and a service record didn't change the legal reality. On the 4th morning, Granite woke to the sound of a vehicle approaching. He grabbed his rifle. He'd turned in his service weapon, but this was personal property, and moved to the window. Justice was already alert, ears forward, body tense but not panicking. A single SUV was coming up the access road, moving slowly. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the cabin. The driver's door opened. Captain Vernon Steele stepped out, alone, hands visible and empty. He called out, voice carrying across the distance. "Lockwood. I'm alone. I'm unarmed. I just want to talk." Granite didn't lower the rifle. "You drove 4 hours to talk?" "I drove 4 hours to tell you that you're not wrong," Steele shouted back. "And to give you an option that doesn't end with you in prison." Granite hesitated, then set the rifle aside and stepped onto the porch, Justice beside him. The dog's presence was solid, reassuring. If Steele had come to arrest him, Justice would know. The dog's instincts about threat assessment had never been wrong. Steele walked closer, stopping at the porch steps. Up close, he looked tired, older than his 50 years. "That video you sent out? It destroyed Carrington. He's been arrested. Merrick's facility has been shut down. 7 retired K9s have been seized and placed in legitimate care facilities." Granite's grip on the porch railing tightened. "And Justice? The department is willing to formally transfer ownership to you," Steele said. "Retroactive to his retirement date. All charges dropped. You keep your job, your pension, everything." It sounded too good to be true. "What's the catch?" "The catch is you have to come back," Steele said. "You have to face an internal review board. You have to answer questions about why you didn't go through proper channels. You have to make them understand that what you did was the only option left." Granite looked down at Justice, who was watching the captain with that measured intelligence. "And if I say no? Then you stay here," Steele said simply. "You live off the grid with a dog you love, and you never work in law enforcement again. You lose your pension. You lose your ability to support your daughter. You lose everything you've built for the last 20 years. He paused. "But you keep your partner. And maybe that's worth more." The words hit harder than any threat could have. Because Steele was giving him a real choice, not an ultimatum. Granite's career versus Justice's safety. His future versus their past. Justice looked up at him, and in those amber eyes Granite saw something that decided it. Trust. Not blind trust. Justice had been betrayed too many times for that. But the kind of trust that says whatever you decide, I'm with you. That was worth fighting for. "I'll come back," Granite said. "But Justice comes with me. Everywhere. Non-negotiable." Steele smiled slightly. "I'd expect nothing less." The internal review board hearing took place 2 weeks later. Granite sat in a room full of brass and bureaucrats, Justice at his side wearing his old service vest. The dog's presence was technically against protocol, but nobody had the courage to ask Granite to remove him. Not after the media storm. Not after the public outcry. Not after 7 retired K9s had been rescued from conditions that made headlines across the country. Lieutenant Carrington's chair was conspicuously empty. He was in a different kind of room, facing different charges: fraud, animal cruelty, conspiracy. His brother-in-law Merrick had already pled guilty in exchange for testimony. The whole operation had collapsed like a house of cards. The board chair, Assistant Chief Thorne Delacroix, reviewed the case file with an expression that gave nothing away. "Officer Lockwood, you violated direct orders. You stole department property. You fled law enforcement. Explain yourself." Granite didn't flinch. Justice isn't property. He's a retired officer who gave 7 years of service to this department. When that service ended, we failed him. We let him be placed in conditions that nearly killed him. I tried to go through proper channels. I was threatened with termination. So I did what any partner would do: I protected him. Delacroix leaned forward. By breaking the law? By honoring the bond that law enforcement is supposed to represent, Granite replied. Loyalty. Partnership. Service. Justice earned those things. I wasn't going to let bureaucracy and corruption take them away. The room was silent. Then Delacroix did something unexpected. He looked at Justice, really looked at him, and something softened in his expression. I had a K9 partner once. 20 years ago. Bruno. Best dog I ever worked with. When he retired, I took him home. He lived 6 more years, and every single day he looked at me like I'd hung the moon. Because I didn't abandon him. He looked back at Granite. This board finds that Officer Lockwood's actions, while technically in violation of policy, were morally justified given the circumstances. Reinstatement with full benefits. Formal transfer of K9 Justice to private ownership. Case closed. Granite's chest loosened for the first time in weeks. Justice's tail wagged once, slowly, like he understood something important had just happened. Outside the hearing room, Waverly was waiting. She hugged Granite quickly, then knelt to Justice's level. You did it, boy. You made them see. Justice pressed his nose against her hand, gentle and trusting in a way he hadn't been when they'd first found him. Recovery wasn't just physical. It was learning to trust again. 6 months later, Justice was a different dog. His weight had returned, his coat gleamed, and while he'd never be cleared for active duty again, he'd found a new purpose. Granite had started a program called Second Service, a non-profit that rescued retired K9s from inadequate facilities and placed them in proper homes. Justice was the program's mascot and its heart. When potential adopters came to meet available dogs, Justice greeted them at the door, assessing them with those sharp amber eyes. Good people, he seemed to say when someone passed his test. This one's okay. Ember visited from college on weekends, bringing friends who'd heard the story and wanted to meet the famous dog. Justice tolerated the attention with dignity, though his favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Early morning walks with Granite, evening training sessions that kept his mind sharp, nights spent on the porch watching stars appear over Montana mountains. One evening, Waverly stopped by with news. Carrington got 8 years. Merrick got 5. And there's legislation moving through the state Congress now requiring oversight for all K9 retirement placements. They're calling it Justice's Law. Granite looked at his partner, who was dozing in a patch of sunset on the porch. The dog's ears twitched at his name, but he didn't open his eyes. He earned it, Granite said quietly. Every bit of it. Waverly nodded. You both did. You stood up when everyone else looked away. You fought when it would have been easier to accept things as they were. That matters. It did matter. Not just for Justice, but for every retired K9 who came after him. The system had changed because one officer refused to abandon his partner. Because one dog refused to give up, even when the world seemed determined to forget him. As night settled over the mountains, Granite sat beside Justice on the porch, his hand resting on the dog's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of breathing. They'd both been through hell. They'd both been betrayed by systems they trusted. But they'd come through it together. Partnership wasn't just a word. It was a promise to stand together, to fight for each other, to never accept that loyalty had an expiration date. Justice opened his eyes and looked at Granite with that old intelligence, that unwavering trust. And in that moment, Granite understood what they'd really won. Not vindication or justice in the legal sense, but something more fundamental. They'd proven that some bonds couldn't be broken by policy or corruption or time. That when someone has stood beside you through the worst moments of your life, you don't walk away. You stay. You fight. You bring them home. Good boy, Granite whispered. Justice's tail thumped twice against the porch. And in the quiet of a Montana evening, surrounded by mountains that had witnessed their struggle and their victory, two partners rested. Not because their work was done. There would always be more dogs to save, more fights to wage. But because they'd earned this moment of peace. Together. The way it should have been from the start.